Okay. So for the very first bias that was discussed by Rold Dobelli in his book, The Art of Thinking Clearly, we have the survivorship bias. And it actually is summarized in one statement. And that statement is we have the tendency to overestimate our chances to succeed in anything that we do. Say, for instance, if you are a musician, if you are like a startup business person, we are actually prone to overestimating our own chances to succeed. Successful singers, teachers, artists, and many others who were very good at what they do is what actually the media is focusing more on. Sabi nga nung nag-work ako sa pub, it has to be very remarkable for us to make a news out of it. Okay, so if nothing is so remarkable about a person, like hindi naman siya nag-succeed, hindi naman siya ganun kagaling sa ginagawa niya, sometimes the media is not really going to put so much of its attention and energy in covering that story. And perhaps because of that, we tend to focus on these superstars, on these very good people, successful people, for inspiration. Halimbawa, when you are a startup musician, you put up a band, you have these very successful bands in mind. Di ba? You have to admit that. You have this image of successful people. Their poster is perhaps in on your walls sa bedroom mo, thinking that your band will soon be as big as their band. Well, that is not like the survivorship bias per se. Behind those people who were successful, behind these writers, say J.K. Rowling, okay, a very successful writer, a very successful author, behind her are it's a very long line of unsuccessful writers. So these writers, they have similar stories to J.K. Rowling in terms of their manuscripts being rejected. Diba, J.K. Rowling has been talking about how Harry Potter was rejected by several publishers, right? There are tons of other unsuccessful writers who also experienced that same thing. Also, behind J.K. Rowling, a very successful writer, perhaps are writers who were dreaming of writing their own book, but they never really got the chance to do so because of perhaps several reasons that you can just cite. Say, for instance, they just did not have the motivation to write their own book. They just did not have the inspiration, the story to begin their book. It's this long line of writers behind J.K. Rowling and other successful writers who did not succeed. Perhaps there are writers who got themselves their works published, like their manuscripts did not end up being dusty in some old desk somewhere in the world. Perhaps there are really these writers who got their manuscripts published, but that doesn't mean that they sold copies of their books, right? And does that equate success? So, and aside from, of course, those fields that we cited, this survivorship bias also happens in other industries, say in music, in photography, also in business, in terms of starting up a business, and many other fields. But actually, just because there is a very big tendency for your business, start a business, for your book to fail, for whatever you're doing to not really achieve that level of success, just because there's that tendency for that dream not to happen, it doesn't mean that we have to stop trying in the first place. The point of of survivorship bias is when we are doing something, we have to avoid overestimating our chances in succeeding that big, in making something that big and successful. Okay, when we are working on something, say halimbawa ako when I'm building this channel, when we are building something, we have to guard ourselves frequently from the urges of survivorship bias. We have to dig up the stories of those writers, of musicians who failed in that particular field. So why do we have to do that? Because when we dig up their stories, we'll know where they failed, and we'll know their characteristics to be very similar to the characteristics of those who succeeded in that similar field. Several unsuccess, very actually siguro thousands and thousands of unsuccessful writers do have the same characteristics as successful writers like say E.L. James or J.K. Rowling, to cite a few, or others like Veronica Roth, diba? Their characteristics in terms halimbawa of their work ethics, they're very similar, and there is really no point to list down all of the factors for us to succeed in anything related that we do. Bawa, if you're an aspiring writer, do not just focus on the stories of these successful writers. You also have to look at the stories of those who failed in writing. What happened to them? What happened to their manuscript? What are their characteristics? Are they? Just because they failed in writing, does that mean hindi sila masipag? Does that mean that they did not keep on trying to have their manuscripts published? Does that mean that they do not have the success for the factors to succeed in writing? Are their personalities very different from the personalities of successful people? Ayun. And when you start writing your book, you have to make sure, you have to keep in mind that you don't overestimate its chance to succeed. Siguro you just this is like becoming very realistic about our expectations. Siguro it's a hit on that. Pero survivorship bias is telling us that there is this tendency for us to overestimate our success, and we have to always be looking out for that. This is Siege, and I hope that I'll be seeing you in the next one.